Hey y'all, how's it going? Today we are going to be using up some herbs, also using up some meat I had in the fridge, and a couple of random things to make some meatballs that we're gonna stick in the freezer. So let's go grab some herbs out of the garden and get started. So the way you're gonna get your basil nice and bushy is by trimming it like this. So you wanna trim it right where there's a leaf node, and then go ahead and trim it, and then it'll get nice and bushy. And especially with this purple basil, this will be perfect for putting in meatballs. See, you can see where I did it right here, and it's already bushing out. So I think we're gonna take this one a little higher up. And then do these here. This rosemary has not grown quite as much as I wanted it to be honest, but that's okay. Okay, so we've got our rosemary, basil, this is oregano from the community garden, and then we've got sage from the community garden. We've got an onion from the community garden. Then we've also got some garlic. This is our sage pork sausage. All it has is pork, water, salt, spices, sugar. So we're gonna just amp this up a little bit. We've got 2 eggs because we're gonna be making a lot of meatballs. And then because I am completely gluten-free, so instead of breadcrumbs, we're actually gonna be using quinoa as kind of the breadcrumb replacement. So we've got a lot of chopping to do, a lot of prep work, and then we'll kind of get to grinding these. So when you're cutting your basil, something that I like to do is I like to pluck my leaves and stack them like this. And once you get a good few of them, you want to put your biggest one on the bottom. Once you get a few of them, what you can do is you can actually take this and roll it up. It's like a tight roll. And you'll be able to smell it at this point because you've bruised it. And then with a really sharp knife, you can take your knife and this is called a chiffonade cut to your basil. It's a really efficient way of getting that basil nice and chopped up and thin. And then I always leave it like this. And then I do a cross section that's a lot less efficient, but still gets the job done. So that is your best way of cutting basil. Honestly, I do sage the same exact way. We'll take our sage, we'll pluck the leaves off. This one's a little bit easier because the leaves are just a little bit more coarse than basil. Basil's pretty delicate. So we'll do the same thing with our sage. We'll take our sage and we'll kind of roll it up. If you've ever rolled like cabbage rolls or grape leaves, it's very similar. And we'll just kind of give it a chop like this. And then you've got these nice little beautiful rounds. So I'm gonna get all of these herbs chopped up, and then we will talk about what to do with the onion because we're gonna do a little saute. Okay, y'all, we have all of our herbs chopped up. We have our garlic grated. I used a microplane. Now we're actually gonna do a couple of things. We are going to saute some green bell peppers that I had from last summer's garden, actually, that really need to be used. So we're just gonna throw those in a saute pan. Get them nice and softened. They're pretty largely chopped, so I might try and reduce that a little bit. Also, this is gonna pop a lot because there's so much water and I'm putting it directly into like some hot oil. So just be careful of doing that. And then our fresh onion from the garden, I chose the one that was the most dried up at the center. It's still pretty dirty. I literally just pulled it like a couple hours ago. So we are going to get this rinsed off in the sink so that we don't end up with any dirt in our meatballs. Nobody wants dirt meatballs. At least I don't think. There's probably somebody out there who does. This person's weird. And then I go over this in my bacon onion jam video, but my favorite way to cut an onion, to dice it, is to cut the top off. You're gonna leave the root end on, and then you're going to cut it in half, and then you're gonna peel it. So I like to take the outermost layer off to get the freshest onion layer that I can get. Do that to both sides. And then what you're gonna do is you're gonna cut vertically. And then you're gonna put your hand, I didn't do this in the bacon onion video, but you're gonna put your hand very flush, and you're actually going to cut the onion in parallel with the cutting board. Please don't cut your fingers. If you do, I didn't teach you how to do this. And then that's where you're gonna chop down to create that really nice dice effect. Now, for this, I'm gonna run my knife through it again, just so that we don't have any like big massive pieces of onion. So we'll just kind of run our knife through the middle of this big pile of onion. And your onion and your meatball is what's gonna provide a lot of the moisture, also with like the fat in your meat. So it's nice. Ooh, those onions are making me cry. It's nice to just get it nicely chopped up. We're just gonna give it a saute just real quick. We're not trying to like cook them all the way through. That'll happen in the cooking process. But we're just trying to get them a little soft. These peppers are going. Toss those onions in. And we're not like trying to cook these till they're brown. We're just trying to cook the onions until they're translucent. I actually had somebody the other day ask me what translucent meant, and it literally just means that they're opaque. So we'll give them a nice little toss. And then while those are sauteing, we can go ahead and add in our meat. So we have organic ground beef, and then we also have some sausage. This sausage we bought to actually do something else with that we didn't end up doing with, and now we're just at the point where we need to use it so that it doesn't go bad. So you can use like pre-herbed sausage for stuff like this, or you can just use ground pork. It doesn't really matter, you know, because you're putting in other meat and other flavors. So that is just fine. So we'll get that squeezed out of there. Set that aside. We'll get our ground beef put in. You can also get gluten-free breadcrumbs, and you can get gluten-free panko. I really like figuring out what kind of substitutions I can use that I already have in my house. So you can even use rice. I don't think the texture would be quite the same as a regular meatball. It's probably not gonna be the same with quinoa either, but you know, for me, it's just about using what we have in the house and not necessarily like using a bunch of other stuff. So we have our meat in there. We're gonna crack a couple of eggs. So we have about 1.5 pounds of meat, and pretty much anything that's gonna be gluten-free is gonna absorb a lot more fat and moisture. Ooh, we didn't get a garlic skin in there, good job. So it's gonna absorb a lot more fat and moisture, so that's why I always add a little bit extra. So even if you're using like gluten-free breadcrumbs or gluten-free panko, make sure you add just a little bit extra moisture. So we'll go ahead and throw in our quinoa, and like I said, we have about 1.5 pounds of meat. So we're gonna use about 1.5 cups of quinoa. So I'm actually gonna freeze these raw on a cookie sheet, and then once they're frozen, I'll stick them in a bag. And then you wanna thaw them before you cook them. And then you can just cook them off at will. So we're gonna wait for our veg to saute. Also, we can add some salt and pepper. So with salt, you wanna be fairly generous. I'll probably add like a tablespoon. For now, maybe a little more. Let's call it 2 tablespoons. And then pepper. Some people love pepper, some people don't. We like pepper. So we'll add some pepper. And see, we're approaching translucent, so we're not quite there yet. I want them to get a little bit more, but you can kind of start to see how you can start to see through the onions. They're getting just a tiny bit opaque. And that's where you want to be. It's really cool to me that I still have bell peppers that I froze last year that I've been using all year, just for different kind of hashes and soups and different stuff, you know, throughout the year. That's a big accomplishment for me. So this is good. Like I said, we just really want to get to that translucent place. We don't want them to be like total mush. So we'll go ahead and toss these in here. And we'll start to incorporate with a spoon until this stuff gets, until our vegetables get a little bit cooler. And it's not really gonna hurt the meat. It might cook the meat slightly, but it's really not a big deal. We're gonna be putting this in the freezer anyway. Also, this meat is like partially frozen, the ground beef is. So once our veggies cool down and there's not as much of a risk that I'm gonna burn myself, we'll go ahead and get in here with our hands. In my not so humble opinion, your hands are your best kitchen and garden tools, actually. So I think we're okay. Go ahead and get in here and kind of just, with meatballs, you almost want to knead it like bread dough, which is somewhat ironic because I can't eat bread. And yeah, we've got a big clump of still frozen beef in here, but that's okay. We're meal prepping, so that'll kind of, you really, I don't, especially without the breadcrumbs, you really can't overmix these meatballs, in my opinion. But you want to get them to the point where you can hold this in your hand and form it and it stays. So we got a little bit more to go. The thing with the quinoa is it's not going to give you the immediate satisfaction that a breadcrumb will. So breadcrumbs are going to start absorbing that liquid really fast because they're, you know, they're completely dry, whereas quinoa is going to take a little bit longer to do that. So now if I would have had these peppers fresh, which you can totally use them fresh, or you can actually just leave them out, you don't have to do them at all. With those fresh peppers, I would probably dice them up a little bit smaller, but again, not the end of the world here. So this smells really good. Again, if you want to taste this for seasoning for whatever reason, you can always grab like a little patty of it and cook it on the stove and try it out. I'm not gonna do that because I probably am gonna put these meatballs with like sauces and stuff like that. So I'm just gonna go ahead and if I feel any of these like frozen parts, we'll go ahead and break those up. But this is getting to a really good texture. So kind of the test you wanna do is you wanna grab a handful and kind of roll it around and see if it holds its shape. And it does. So I actually like bite-sized meatballs. So I'm gonna take my smallest ice cream scoop and probably be smart to put some parchment on here. So I like getting my parchment in pre-cut sheets to make my life a little easier. Pro tip. So we'll do this and start making our meatballs. So what we'll do is we'll take an ice cream scoop, scoop it out, and then just really lightly form it into that ball. It's still gonna settle a little bit on the bottom just from sitting, that's fine. And we'll roll our meatballs. So once I get these meatballs rolled, what we'll do is we'll stick them in the freezer and then bag them. We'll probably stick them in the freezer overnight and I'll stick them in a Ziploc bag tomorrow. And then later in the week, I will show you a dish where I actually cook them off. And we will make us some garden meatballs, friends.
Okay, y'all, so we're actually gonna make these meatballs today for dinner. I'm filling up a higher walled saute pan about halfway full of water, and then you can actually do this with water and then like a broth base, which is what I'm going to use, or you can just use straight up beef broth or vegetable broth or whatever you want to use. But what I like to use is the broth bases that come in a jar, and they're like a paste. I like to use those just because they save room, and if for some reason I don't have the broth that I want to use at any given time, I can just use this broth base, and it's super delicious, and it has all the same ingredients that regular broth would have. So here are our frozen meatballs. Now, since our quinoa is uncooked, we have to cook these meatballs to the point of the quinoa being cooked, because if you consume raw quinoa or quinoa that is not fully cooked, you're going to have a really bad time and you're never going to want to eat quinoa ever again. So we're just going to plunk these in here, and these are completely raw. These are not pre-cooked at all. So we are going to boil them. Now, every Italian person just had a collective gasp, but stick with me here. Gluten-free is different, guys. We have to treat it differently, okay? So we're going to turn this on a medium heat and stick a lid on it. And this is going to go for at least 30 minutes. So you got plenty of time to do something else. So we're going to heat up another saucepan, preferably a wider one, and heat up some olive oil. And we're actually going to reverse sear these meatballs. So they are at this point fully cooked, but now is when we're going to get some browning on them. And they're actually not going to dry out. These are super juicy meatballs because we boiled them, but also because we added an extra egg in the front half of things. That's the reason that these stay together so well, even through the boiling and the sauteing process. So this is when we're going to get a little bit of color on these meatballs before we coat them in some sauce and then stick them over some pasta. Okay, so it's time to add some sauce. Now, I am fresh out of tomato sauce from last year, so we're using an organic store-bought sauce that I really like. It has very few, very simple ingredients, and honestly, y'all, there is no shame in using store-bought sauce. Don't let those other homesteaders make you feel bad, all right? So we are just going to get these meatballs and the marinara kind of heated together. Get them coated in the marinara so that when we combine it with the pasta, it creates like a seamless sauce with the starch from the pasta. And here's the finished product. So thanks so much for watching. Happy gardening. And I hope whether you make your meatballs with quinoa or traditional, this is an awesome way to use up that abundance of herbs coming out of your garden. We'll see you next time.